The A-18C Hornet has just received its first targeting pod, the LITENING 2, and I'm sure many of you, like me, have been waiting some time for this one. Unfortunately, the implementation is very bare bones at the moment, with no ability to use the air-to-air tracking mode, mark points, waypoint designation, or even HUD Symbology. We're also limited to just the center station for now, although the cheek station should be available at a later date. The LITENING 2 targeting pod has powerful optics, with both a TV camera and an IR camera, high zoom levels, laser designation, marker and laser spot tracking ability, representing a major upgrade to our Hornet, giving us the ability to search out and designate targets for ourselves and others. So without further ado, let's get into it. This is quite a big topic and I will cover weapons as well as the targeting pod. As always, timecodes are available on screen and in the description if you would like to jump to a specific section. We'll load up a LITENING 2 and head out to our target. To get started, we need to cool down the targeting pod's sensors. On our right panel, set the FLIR switch to the standby position, and then on our display, we will select the FLIR page. Now we will see the words "Not timed out" and "Ready" crossed through. Once the pod has warmed up, this will disappear and we'll see standby in the top left. This process takes about 2 minutes. Our pod is now active but stowed. Switch the FLIR switch to on. This unstows the camera and we're ready to start using it. It's good practice to keep the targeting pod stowed in standby until needed, although dirt collecting is not an issue in DCS. Lastly, we can enable the laser by switching the laser, target designator and ranger switch to arm. This switch will only enter the armed position if you're on air-to-ground master mode and the targeting pod is warmed up. It will automatically disengage if you change master mode. You can set the targeting pod to any display you wish, although the left and right displays are limited to greenscale. The lower display will be in grayscale, which can be a little easier to read. The only issue is it forces you heads down to look at it. It's up to debate as to if the center display will be able to show the FLIR in the future, however. With our targeting pod warmed up and the FLIR page open, we will now go over the Symbology. Symbology. Unfortunately, there is no HUD Symbology for now, so we will focus on the FLIR page, which in itself is a little short on details such as latitude, longitude, range to target or laser masking. Starting top left, we've got OPR for operational. Below that, we'll show our targeting pod tracking mode, either blank, area track or point track. We've got our field of view, either wide or narrow setting, which can be cycled with the button above. The narrow field of view is also indicated by box corners when in wide mode. The direction in degrees, left or right, off of our nose, the targeting pod is looking, with the amount of degrees up or down our pod is looking on the left center. Below, we see our laser mode, L arm, indicating the laser is armed. This will be blank if the laser is safe or off. Next we have mark. This can be cycled on and off. Note the crosshair and MR change to indicate that it's enabled. With mark boxed, our laser is configured to fire a laser marker visible under night vision goggles. This cannot be used to guide laser weapons. The TDC focus diamond will be present if our Hotas Controls are set to this display. Trig. This selects if our trigger is armed to fire the laser or not. This will also disable the selection of the air-to-ground gun whilst enabled. RTCL reticule, or cycling the reticule which is presently not implemented. UFC, which when selected will allow us to change our laser codes on the upfront controller, and the current laser code our targeting pod will designate with. Working around, we've got our own aircraft's altitude in feet, our airspeed, and Mach number. The declutter button will toggle hiding our airspeed and altitude for now. Beside that, our currently selected laser spot frequency and the L SS button. Pushing this enables the laser spot search on the displayed frequency. In the bottom left, we've got our camera mode. Pressing this cycles to either CCD, charge coupled device, better known as TV camera, or our FLIR camera for an infrared image. Whilst this is selected, we gain the option to cycle the polarity of hot or cold objects to white hot or black hot. Switch between these as necessary to provide the best visibility of hot spots. On the left side, we've got the autofocus button, which currently has no function. Our zoom setting. This shows how much zoom is applied. You can push the on-screen buttons to zoom in or out. Lastly, in the center we have our crosshair showing the location our pod is currently targeting, and where the laser will impact. Just outside this we can see a small box, which is pointing towards the target. It gives the relative direction the pod is looking. If you reference the center as our aircraft, with the edges being the horizon, with the center being directly below. This is great for getting an idea of where the pod is looking relative to our own aircraft quickly. In addition to the controls directly on the display, we can also use our Hotas, so let's go over that quickly. Hotas Controls. To enable our Hotas Controls, we need to first select the TDC focus to our FLIR page by pressing the sensor control hat in the direction of the display our FLIR page is open on. We can control the level of zoom by pressing our radar elevation wheel up or down, or by short pressing the RAID/FLIR FOV select button, we can cycle between narrow and wide fields of view. Long presses of the RAID/FLIR FOV select button will cycle between FLIR and TV camera modes. Our TDC slew will direct the camera as you might expect. The greater the zoom level, the slower our camera will slew. Pushing the sensor control switch in the same direction as our targeting pod once more will toggle between area track and point track. In this case, we would have to push sensor control switch right. Use area track to stabilize the camera on the location under the crosshair. You will want to use point track if you wish to track a specific point on a building or a moving vehicle. Point track is indicated by a box around the object it is tracking. Good contrast is required to obtain a track in this mode. Note that if the camera is masked, you will lose your point track and the camera will revert to an area track of the last known point. Pressing TDC depress action will designate the point under our crosshairs as a target, usable for weapons employment. It will also show on the HUD with a visual indicator of the location and the range to it. Note that the designated point does not follow your crosshair and remains where you last pressed the TDC depress to designate. The nosewheel steering button will undesignate any point set by the pod, but will not reset the camera. Pressing the cage uncage button will return our targeting pod to the caged boresight position, looking forwards and 5 degrees down. Depressing the sensor control switch will enable memory mode, indicated by the word MEM. This is not yet implemented, but I recommend having it bound. And lastly, pressing the second stage trigger will fire our laser if trig is selected on the FLIR page. If you are struggling to identify an object, switch to TV mode. It may also help if you use the center display, as its black and white image can be easier to read. When searching for targets, I recommend you use the wide setting with a mild zoom, so you can see a reasonable area, and then tap the FLIR FOV button to zoom in and inspect, and then press again to zoom out, allowing you to quickly look at points of interest without the slow process of zooming in and zooming out. If you are struggling to get a good point track on a moving object, first try using the FLIR in both white hot and black hot, and failing that, get closer to the vehicle. The system requires good contrast to track, and this will not always be possible. Whilst using the targeting pod, keep an eye on your own airspeed and altitude, so you don't find yourself in an unexpected dive. I'd also suggest making use of the autopilot modes to hold altitude automatically whilst searching, and to set up altitude warnings in case you stray too low. Remember that you will get a better field of view from being further away and higher up. Being too close to the target area can result in you feeling like you're looking down a drinking straw to try and find targets. With that, let's get to the fun part: weapons. GPS guided weapons. JDAMs and JSOWs are very simple to use with a targeting pod. Set up like you would usually, and select Target of Opportunity mode. Find the target with our pod and press the TDC depress action to designate that point. Then, follow the JDAM HUD cues and release when in range. If we wish to drop multiple GPS weapons on multiple targets, we can transfer our Target of Opportunity mission target info into a pre-planned target. To do this, select Fuse as desired, and then go to the quantity and the number of bombs you wish to drop, then go on to the mission page. We can then designate our first target with the targeting pod and TOO mode. Then switch to pre-planned mode. Note that the coordinates have been transferred. We then step to the next bomb and select an empty pre-planned target. Switch to TOO mode again, and set the new designated point with our targeting pod, and then once more return to pre-planned to transfer this across. Remember, for stations with multiple weapons on, select a different pre-planned mission before switching back to TOO mode, otherwise you will overwrite the previous one. Be careful that you don't overwrite any stored coordinates unintentionally by undesignating before you change modes. Once you've got all the bombs you wish to drop set up with coordinates, you can do a JDAM attack. Laser guided weapons. Next up are laser guided bombs and Mavericks. We'll first set the laser code for our targeting pod by selecting the UFC button on the FLIR page. On the UFC, we will then select LTDC and enter our desired frequency. We'll then select the trig option on the FLIR page to arm our trigger with the laser. Do not forget to set the laser code to match the laser code set on our targeting pod. Now configure our weapon as desired and find the target with our pod and designate it with TDC depress. Remember to use point track for moving objects and ensure to update the location periodically with TDC depress if the vehicle is moving fast, as the designated point does not track the crosshair location actively. For laser guided bombs, we'll select the auto delivery mode. This should now be queued to the point we designated with the pod. Simply follow the HUD cues to the target and release like a normal auto attack. After weapons release, hold the trigger down to turn our laser on. Note that the only indication that our laser is firing is on the top center with LTD/R or Laser Target Designator Ranger. If you see a blank space or laser arm, you are not firing the laser. For laser Mavericks, once again, just find the target, ensure both weapons and the pod use the same laser frequency, and then turn towards target. Ensure trig is boxed, and press the trigger to fire the laser. With the laser firing, we will switch our focus to our laser Maverick, uncage it, and check it has located our laser and is tracking. Then press and hold the weapon's release button to fire when you are within range. Remember that you need to ensure the laser is maintained until the weapon impacts the target, and that the laser will mask before the camera does. Unfortunately, for the moment, there is no indication of this other than the laser switching off and being unable to re-enable. Again, I've covered laser guided bombs and Mavericks in my tutorial series if you're unfamiliar with them. Laser marking. We can use our laser to mark spots at night to other aircraft equipped with night vision goggles. Simply select the Mark button. Note that it will change to MR for marking laser, and our crosshairs will also change to reflect this. Arm the trigger and press our trigger down to fire the marking laser. You'll now notice how we can see the beam with NVGs. This can be used to quite literally point out where we are targeting to other aircraft using night vision goggles. Remember that this mode cannot be used to guide laser-guided weapons. Laser Spot Search Mode. In addition, we can also use our targeting pod to search for active lasers, such as those used by JTACs. Simply contact the JTAC or a player, agree on a laser code to use. We can see our currently selected code above the Laser Spot Search button. Ensure the laser code we have set matches theirs by pressing the UFC button and then selecting LSTC, then enter the laser code and enter to select the code we wish to search for. We can then command the JTAC or a player to turn on their laser and press the Laser Spot Search button. The pod will now start slewing across its field of view, searching for laser reflections. Note that the image will pause until the laser spot has been acquired, and you'll be able to see the pod's diamond indicator of angle change as it sweeps across to try and find a laser. Your pod should automatically acquire after a little while, and then slew the pod onto the laser spot, where you can then proceed to take control, seek out targets, or designate that point with the TDC depress. If you can't find the laser, ensure you're pointing towards the spot and get closer. AGM-65F. For IR Mavericks, we simply need to bring up our Maverick page, find the target with our targeting pod and press the Designate button. The Maverick should then automatically slew onto our designated point and then we can fire. To launch on another target, press the Undesignate, locate a new target and press Designate. Once again, the Mav should slew onto your new target. If you do not press the Undesignate button between Mavericks, your next Maverick will not automatically slew to the new designation. Dumb weapons. Using dumb weapons with the targeting pod is much the same as it is with a designated waypoint. Locate the target, designate, and then use it as a visual reference for the attack, with your desired weapon and release mode. Remember that if you have trig boxed, you will not be able to select the gun for air-to-ground use. You can also use auto-bombing mode to drop weapons on the designated point. Early access limitations, workarounds and tips. As you've probably noticed, there's quite a bit missing from the targeting pod at the moment, the biggest issue being no HUD symbols, mark point functionality, or the ability to slave our camera to coordinates. If you wish to visually put your TGP onto a point, this can be difficult as there is currently no HUD symbol for the TGP crosshair. My workaround is achieved by caging your targeting pod to bore sight and repeatedly hitting TDC depress to designate it. This will give you a momentary indication of where the pod is looking. You can then either slew and designate, or fly and designate the point over the rough area of a target such as a SAM launch. For getting onto waypoints there are two ways. You can either do it visually by designating your waypoint on the HSI, getting it in view on the HUD, and then guess the location the T-pod is looking and designate it, and then correct visually to the rough area by repeatedly designating and slewing. Alternatively, open the Situational Awareness page, select a waypoint and designate it. Note the small square with a dot in the center. This is the ground location our targeting pod is looking. Simply slew the TGP until that box is over the center of our designated waypoint, and you should find the camera is roughly on target. You could also use this to search the center of a SAM site threat ring in an attempt to locate the launch site. Of course, the accuracy of this is quite limited and works best with the SA page offset and set to a small scale. If you are equipped with some GPS guided bombs, you can actually get the latitude and longitude coordinates from your designated point of the targeting pod by using Target of Opportunity mode, selecting the mission page and then viewing the coordinates shown for TOO mode. You could then write these coordinates down and manually enter them into pre-planned mode, or pass them on to another aircraft. I'm a little disappointed by how bare bones the system is right now. I would honestly rather have waited a little longer for a more complete system, since I feel we are missing some basic things. But I am excited to see how this develops, and with the addition of ground radar, air-to-air slaving, and more features down the line. This gives the Hornet some much needed independence, able to designate and find targets for itself. But until then, I hope you've enjoyed, and happy hunting.